Tej, welcome. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. Hey, Alex.
You, you two know each other. Well, listen, I'll let Alex introduce you, and then we'd love to hear your story.
I'm not gonna do a massive introduction because he's far better at talking about his stuff than I am. Just to say that it's a really inspiring story of kind of pushing a very radical approach to education. Well, but it's quite revolutionary, I think, which is why it was so critical to have him in the book. But I think also just the role that Be More Pirate played, and not in just in amping it up. I think so. Yeah, I'll let you explain it.
Qualifying it, amping it up, permission. Just it was an interesting point in my journey in my life, having read Be More Pirate, and also who gave it to me as well. So how do you want me to kick off? Should I just give a bit of background?
I would love, for those that don't know your story, just to give a really quick summary of where you've come from school time through to what you're doing now.
So short version is I found myself so the PC version, we're not really here to be PC, was I got invited to see the inside of 3 schools by the time I was 15, and had a really difficult time. Just absolutely did not get school. Was always a kid in the class that couldn't get it. Spent more time outside of the classroom in detentions and just basically getting told off by my teachers left, right, and centre. To which I then thought, you know what, stuff it, to hell with it. I left at 15 to pursue a career as a professional tennis player. I did that. It was a great passion of mine. I did that for a good 4.5, 5 years. And it was on the tennis circuit where I thought, well, look, how can I go from just having such a miserable time in school, not getting it academically, constantly being told off rather than shown what to do, to being able to poorly, I might add, compete on the tennis circuit, but just be able to get up at 4 a.m. and train, which I couldn't. I mean, you couldn't pay me to get up to attend math class in the morning. It just wouldn't happen. And then I just started exploring how if we could just capture 10, 20, 30% of what an athlete has exposure to and package it, bottle it up through any means and get it out to the most hardest to reach in schools, what would happen? And that then started that effectively, when I met Alex, I said, look, for me, 10 years ago, I couldn't even do my times table. So looking at setting up a business, looking at creating some change, adding some value in what we're doing was not the intention. The intention was really just to say, hey, kids who are struggling, who are not the most academically gifted, who are not the most academically brighted, there is another way to do it. So it's constantly been a journey of just pure-blooded rebelliousness, in all honesty. It's the only way I can put it, especially in school. And sort of took it on myself to say the entire education system, I mean, it's changed in the last 10 years. There are nations which are advancing, but our system here in the UK, it's still a relic of the agrarian age. We're now heading into the intelligence age. We've passed the automation age. And unless we significantly update our frameworks, we're already behind. So we're already playing catch up with the rest of the world. So decided to see if I could somewhat naively try and influence that.
It's the only way to start, with some naivety and a mission. And so Tej, tell us what's happened since you kicked off that ambitious mission.
Right. So God, where do I begin? So we've now got I wrote a curriculum. So Alex, I didn't share this with you, but 72 hours ago we just got full off-call accreditation. So we managed to now turn it. Took us 3.5 years. We've turned it into a national qualification, which focuses on effectively teaching a pupil. And Ben, you hit the nail on the head earlier in your comment. Focuses on more how to learn as opposed to what to learn, because I thought it was just for me in school. The one person who was never asked how they felt was the child, me. So you're predicting my grades, you're predicting my results. Yet how can you predict performance? Or how can you place judgment on my potential without actually asking how I am? And education is genuinely the only field that really focuses on assessing future performance based on previous predictions. And that's a flawed data point. So I created a technology using machine learning. It's taken 10 years to build, that would predict whether a pupil would pass or fail their exams based on their perceptions, based on their behaviors, and based on their current skill set. And we're using that now across 8 countries now to really try and build a system that is more sustainable and transferable for the most important person in the room, in the classroom, which is the pupil. And then be able to really feed that data back to the teacher, so the teachers aren't necessarily judged in the flawed way that they're judged day in, day out, to be able to say, actually, how you feel does matter, and it is an accurate indicator of your future performance. Algorithmically now, we're at a point now where the system is predicting exam results and test scores in over an 86% accuracy in grade prediction. Now, that's not to say we've just come up with this. Obviously, I'm biased. It's pretty cool. It works. Spent a lot of time and a lot of other people's money trying to make it happen. But it's to say that fundamentally, our entire system has been flawed for a long time, and flawed in the very essence that, we spend on average in the UK alone 81 billion on state education. And if you saw the article 3 days ago, the inspiring news that there will be a digital skills shortage. I mean, and that keeps me up at night. We are one of the largest economies on earth. We have abundance of opportunities here, but it seems that our education system is just so archaic, a product of the dark ages. And I'm just trying to shake the tree and say, there is another way to do this. Spend most of my time in fights. I mean, intellectual fights, of course.
It sounds like you revel in them, and you're very good at it, Tej. It's amazing, even this snippet you're sharing. Two questions for you. One, what does the how look like? So you're trying to reposition education from what is taught to how it's taught. Give us a couple of examples of that. And number 2, how far into this are you? Is this you're a decade in? Is that right now?
Yeah. So I'll ask your second question. This year it's 10 years in officially. Feels like 150. 6 years was purely research and development, because there didn't exist a framework where you could accurately first assess, diagnose, and report a pupil's perceptions. Because what does that mean? What does perception mean? So over the 6 years, I had to define, well, what is perception? And we got it down to 8 actual core perceptions that influence a pupil's performance, such as my perception towards my subject demands. If I'm struggling in math and the teacher turns around and says, look, here, solve the area of trapezium, unless I've addressed my perception towards 1, the instruction, and 2, being able to solve that area of trapezium, me solving that area of trapezium is a sheer waste of time. So for a student, that's only going to end up in humiliation, do you remember, you must have had moments in school where everyone puts a hand up and you're that only kid who's like, shit, don't pick on me, and the teacher asks you to do it. Now, the second biggest fear on earth that humans face is public speaking. So if you take 30 kids in a class, you compound that fear across a 20-year lifespan. That's how you then develop a mental health problem. That's how you develop a confidence problem. It starts in the classroom. Another example is, framework-wise, is how do you then assess behavior and skills? So it took a lot of time to really say, well, look, nothing out there really qualifies or exists to measure what I want to measure. So I had to write my own framework. And that took 6.5 years. We then had to get it accredited. We had to get it validated. We then had to prove it. So we got it out to, across the 6 years, we got it out to just under 100 schools. We gave it away for free. And the message was simple. We're going to guarantee that anyone who's going through our program, anyone who's being assessed with our technology, will outperform the highest performers in the school and do it in half the time. Because ultimately, the goal for us is, how do you create 18 months worth of academic outcomes in 6? Because the kids in Portsmouth who are in 4th generation unemployment, the kids in inner city Birmingham, the kids who are choosing to join a gang in parts of Tottenham, Peckham and Hackney, I'm generalizing here, but we get the gist. Ultimately, they're going to meet that need somewhere. And I need them to meet the need of significance, importance in the classroom, not on the street. And you've got some of the brightest kids who ultimately are entering into difficult, environments that they can't come out of. Because yes, they haven't had the best parenting, because mum and dad are fearful, because by the time the child is 7, they've got higher literacy capability than mum and dad. So we have no choice now. We've done such a spectacular job as a nation of really extending the learning gap between the ones who get it and the ones that don't. I mean, we've really succeeded in dividing most of the students very well. I'm obviously, as you can tell, being very sarcastic. That ultimately for us, it's unless you can take a child in 8.8 million kids in UK education, unless you can take the 3, 4, 5 million who are struggling, how do we then close that gap? So our goal with our technology, our goal with all of our programs and our frameworks is to say, look, if you just did this and we showed you how to learn, give you a classic example to answer your first question, and you could do that solid for 6 months, could you achieve 18 months worth of schools outcomes and get ahead? So it's not only about leveling the playing field, it's about acceleration, sustainability, and then transferability. Now, if you could do that, you've changed your entire generation of family who haven't been able to achieve that. You got a chance of getting a job. You got a chance of getting into university. So that's our focus. In terms of the skills and the how to learn approach, you take a classic example. I mean, I'm looking around, but I don't have one here. But do you remember the revision guides we used to work from in school? The textbooks. Classic example, teacher gives you a textbook and says, look, turn to page 36, and it's the carbon cycle as an example. And you're sitting there, you're looking at it. Already you're struggling in science. Already you're feeling like school's not right for you. Already you're in a bottom set and everyone else is learning. What is a more empowering skill to teach you? The fundamental understanding of the carbon cycle, or your ability to retain and recall that and structure that information in the beginning? Now, as adults, we primarily focus on just understanding, retaining, recalling, and structuring before we can conceptually understand what it is. So the question we asked, and I asked a decade ago, was what's more important for a child who is struggling? Their ability to remember what they're learning or their ability to understand it? And can you understand something without remembering it? Ultimately, the research indicated that if we could help a child retain and recall and structure information prior to them conceptually understanding it, right? They don't necessarily can walk into an exam and answer the questions properly, but they weren't then fearful of the topic itself. They could put their hand up. It's actually, this is step 3. This is step 4. This is process A. Mm-hmm. Then it's just a case of repetition, like you do as an athlete. As an athlete, what do? Well, I can't hit 300 forehands cross-court against Federer because he's going to spank it back and I'm done. But let's get to a point where I can actually lift my elbow up, repeat the process 300 times, and then I might stand a chance of walking into the exam hall and remembering what I'm learning. So when I uncovered all of this, and this is what took 6.5 years of just pure R&D, it was overwhelming at how simple it is to create the change. That's the crazy bit. The complexity is in the diagnostic, is in identifying and pinpointing what is actually lacking in that child that we can upskill. So that's why we built a machine to do that. But the simple bit is actually closing the gap. And that's where I think fundamentally, and this may sound very extreme, that we have been sold a lie. Education is not a complicated framework to get right. It's actually fairly simple. If we place the pupils' social, emotional, mental health, their perceptions, their behaviors, and the skill at the forefront of the curriculum, not their ability to solve math problems instantly. It's the famous saying, first teach me how, then show me what, and then repeat that until I've mastered it. But we don't do that.
I feel like we've just had the second TED Talk, revolutionary TED Talk of the evening. Tej, it's so inspiring and educational in the real sense. 2 really quick questions, and then we want to jump over to Dina. No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I really appreciate you sharing it with us. Firstly, well, how can we help? Like, where is this thing? How can we help? What part can we play as curious enthusiasts? And Lavinia is asking a slightly uncomfortable question. She says, is grade prediction necessary? It's an uncommon concept from people who didn't study in the UK.
Yeah, great question. So let me answer that question. Is grade prediction necessary? So we use grade prediction as a way of measuring potential. And grade prediction is the most inaccurate assessment of one's potential. So is grade prediction necessary? It's necessary so long as we have a system that judges potential based on exam results and test scores. Because if you take that away, the whole system collapses. So yes, in the UK, the system would collapse if we didn't predict grades. Do I believe grade prediction is an accurate indicator of potential? Hell no, is my scientific answer to that question. Purely because if you look at a lot of the greatest thinkers and innovators of our time, they weren't necessarily judged by previous exam results and test scores. So the shortest answer to that question is in the UK, yes, because our system would fundamentally flop. And I believe that's not the answer. There's a point where disruption becomes unmanageable and unhealthy. For the same tone that I could throw bullets at the school system. Having said that, we are inspirational globally, and we all must take a moment, especially me at times, to say we provide a free education in this country, and it works the majority of the time. So, you know, hats off, and doing it on scale and doing it en masse, and that's why it's no one's fault. We can't blame the politicians. We can't blame off and Ofsted. We can't blame Ofcom. We can't blame the regulators, because this is a scale issue, but it's also a mindset issue. So if we can step away from a notion that my exam results equal my potential and therefore the set I'm in, as opposed to looking at my effort, as opposed to looking at my transformation, as opposed to looking at the journey, but also looking at other methods of testing and other methods of assessment, which is a whole other 4 hours of getting into, then we are deluding ourselves into thinking that we can compete globally in the next 30 years. We can't. In terms of just a wider community and a wider movement, so Be More Pirate for me has been a game changer, purely because when I read the book, I had a good, honest look in the mirror to say I'd almost had to condition myself to really not create too much noise, because there's a point in a business where you scale to a point where you don't want to end up so out there where you don't actually fit in anywhere. And we were pretty much on the edge anyway. I mean, rocking up to a school and saying, give me your most difficult pupils and you've done it all wrong, we're going to do it all better. For the first 4 years, basically laughed me out of the room. And it was tough, especially in some of the schools we were dealing with, where we were winning the kids over, but the powers that be weren't necessarily comfortable with our approach, because we were basically saying, look, for 6 months, I don't want you to learn anything. I want you to learn how to learn it. That's like, what? Yeah, don't go to class. In fact, don't do any revision. Do this for an hour a week and do nothing else. Now, for an athlete, that's easy, right? Just literally, my coach would say, right, I'm going to tie you up like this, and you're not going to move for literally for 3 hours until this elbow doesn't do anything. Oh, okay, great. For a child, if all you taught them how to do was retain, recall, and structure information, so the fear would drop and not attend class, you're going to create some havoc. You're going to disrupt some seeds. So what I'd request everyone to do in the community is, ultimately, if you've got children, really focus on identifying their process of learning. If you're a teacher out there, one real simple message, that we're at a time now coming out of this pandemic that I actually don't believe there's been a significant amount of lost learning, because that's such a discredit to the schools to say that there's so much lost learning. Schools have been working 24/7 like normal. So for teachers out there, ignore that. That's more rhetoric. And just focus on you, most importantly, because your social, emotional, mental health is critical, because without that, it all fails. And take the next 3 to 4 weeks to spoil yourself a bit over the Easter holidays, because summer's coming and we know what that means in schools.
Tej,